A character of integrity and ingenuity, known as the man who put the world on wheels, Henry Ford has become one of the most significant and influential icons ever to grace the world of automobile history. He had a dream of producing a quality car that would be affordable to the general public, and with the advent of his famous Model T in 1908, such precepts were wholeheartedly achieved. The Model T was a revolution in personal transportation, and by 1913, in order to keep up with the demand, Ford had established the first ever continuous production assembly line. 5 years later, and half of all American cars were Model Ts. The era of mass production had dawned, with Henry Ford transforming the art of car manufacturing forever. Many of the pioneering precepts behind the Ford Motor Company remain to this day, with Ford continuing to be a leader in the increasingly competitive world market of motoring. So now, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to sample a few of the classic Ford favourites for ourselves. The story behind the Ford Popular goes back to the year 1932. Ford had previously had a very prosperous export market of their larger-engined models, but since higher tax penalties for bigger engine sizes had been introduced in the 1920s, Britain now needed to go small. 15 examples of small European cars were shipped to Ford's headquarters in Dearborn, Michigan, for evaluation and to spark ideas of how Ford could develop its first truly small and economical car. The result was very pleasing, and the 8-horsepower Model Y left the production line at Dagenham factory in August 1932, dubbed as a most stylish and well-performing small-budget car. The arrival of the Model Y could not go unnoticed by other competitors in the field, and car company Morris was particularly keen to produce their own version. With this emerged the Morris 8. Sharing many similarities with the Model Y, engineers at Ford knew they had to push themselves even further to surpass their previous masterpiece. The advent of the Model Y went on to inspire the creation of the Ford Anglia series, where its bloodline continued until the production of the last Ford Popular in the late 1950s. In all the 27 years of this evolution, every model was in fact based upon the same simple chassis frame, transverse leaf spring suspension, and a version of the side valve engine as first used in the Model Y. The first Popular, the 103E, introduced in 1953, was basically a stripped-down or de-trimmed version of the early Ford Anglia E494A with a Ford Prefect engine. It was an all-time first for the British saloon market when it was launched at the rock-bottom price of just £100. Fancy frills and quirky catchphrases were simply not necessary in Ford's advertising slogans for the new car. The simple phrase, "the lowest price car in the world," was more than enough to do the trick. Although very simple, the 103E Popular Saloon was strong, sturdy and extremely functional, with a classic 1950s style. Based on pre-war running gear, the 4-cylinder 1172cc engine had the basic side valve unit and was mated to a 3-speed gearbox. The Ford Popular could reach a maximum speed of 61 miles per hour, and although this statistic may not cause a huge buzz of excitement today, especially compared with the current fast-track market, back then there was nothing to complain about, and for the outstanding bargain price, it was even better. With tiny headlamps and painted bumper, the trim was fairly primitive, and the single vacuum-powered windscreen wiper was quite breathless. In certain conditions, the wiper could be altogether puffed out. However, this was a standard problem of the vacuum wiper mechanism and not just an inconvenience tied to the popular models. Other cars in the Ford side valve engine family, such as the Prefect and Anglia, were also subject to the same problem. As Ford upgraded and improved their Anglia and Prefect ranges, the 103E Popular remained unchanged until 1959, when the 100E model was released. Having many similarities with the previous three-door, four-seater popular car, the 100E retained the three-speed gearbox and temperamental vacuum-operated wipers. The new Popular, like its sister 100E Anglia, now had a mesh grille. The rear lamps were changed to separate Lucas units, and with a more advanced version of the side valve engine, the 100E could reach a top speed of 69 miles per hour with a 0 to 60 of 36.4 seconds. The Ford Popular served the British people very well during its production days, and in true Ford style provided a robust and economical car that was accessible to the masses. Today, this modest little number has become a much celebrated and adored classic Ford car. The Ford Anglia made its first appearance just before the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. In true Ford style, the engineering and design were kept simple and practical, ensuring a very decent and affordable package was provided. The original model, codenamed E04A, included mechanical brakes and the basic side valve engine without water pump, as used in the earlier 7Y 8 horsepower Ford model. The Anglia was available as a two-door, four-seater saloon, and what colour could they possibly come in other than the famous Ford black? The first Anglia van variant, the E04C, was released in 1940. In fact, throughout the duration of Anglia production, a van derivative was always made for each model type, providing faithful vehicles for firms up and down the country. In 1948, after the 55,000th 807th model had been produced, the original Ford Anglia was discontinued. The slightly improved replacement, the E494A, featured very few alterations, including slight trim and front-end restyling. There was also the addition of those more handy items that we'd be lost without today, such as indicators and a second windscreen wiper. The new Anglia was built from 1948, providing a stopgap until the arrival of the next upgrade, although it didn't receive a new lease of life when it continued as the Ford Popular until 1959. As the Anglia was finding its own feet within the British motoring market, the success of the Ford Consul and Zephyr series were proving most impressive. They'd even rid Ford cars of their affectionate nickname, Dagenham dustbins, which related to the low-priced but highly respected cars produced in Ford's Dagenham plant in Essex. Ford decided to apply the Consul Zephyr styling and engineering principles to the new Anglia 100E model. The revolutionised unitary body, fashionable three-box styling, and McPherson-type strut front suspension gave the Anglia a very contemporary look, and soon a more tweaked deluxe model was introduced. Even though the old side valve engine lay beneath the bonnet, and the vacuum-operated wipers could fail when going uphill, the 100E Anglia served a prosperous life until 1959, with almost 3,500 in circulation. Immediately after followed the Ford Anglia 105E, available in deluxe and standard versions. The standard model, although very functional, was true to its name with basic design inside and out. No carpets, no passenger sun visor, no glove box lid, and certainly no extravagant use of chrome, as the more luxurious version proudly displayed. The stylish body shape of the Deluxe was chrome-enhanced at every possible line and curve, including the side strip, full width of the grille, and rear lamp units. Optional Deluxe extras were a heater and two-tone body paint. The Anglia 105E Saloon Series was quite a revolution. It got away from the old side-valve engine, converting to a new overhead type that was capable of 75 miles per hour. Not only this, but Ford installed its first ever 4-speed gearbox used in a production saloon. What caused even more of a stir, though, was the radically styled reverse-sloping back window. Adding to the visibly American-influenced looks was a sharply sloping front and extended rear fins that helped make the 105 Anglia an altogether attractive and highly popular car. The range continued almost unchanged until the summer of '61, when the van variations were launched, shortly followed by the Ford Anglia Estate. The Estate version came about as a conversion project of the 105E Anglia Saloon. From the centre door pillars forward, there was no difference between the two models, but the Estate did provide a little extra load space for the heavier traveller. The saloon's original boot area measured just 10 cubic feet, compared with the 35.4 cubic feet that could be gained out of the Estate once its hinged rear seats had been folded forward. Also, to cope with any extra weight in the boot, suspension was uprated and tyre size increased. The next and much more powerful model added to the Anglia range was the 123E, otherwise known as the Super. Launched in 1962, the stylish Super used a larger 11.9cc version of the standard Anglia engines. Customers in Europe were offered a unique variant called the Anglia Sportsman, although the only real difference was a spare tyre mounted onto the back of the car, resembling the Continental kit style often seen in America. And so the Sportsman marked the end of a long and successful production life that spanned for over 20 years. During its day, the Ford Anglia was even a popular choice as a police works car. Reliable, functional and smart, the Anglia will faithfully remain as one of Ford's most cherished classics. During the 1950s, Ford planned to develop a car for the middle range of the British motoring market, suitable to contend with the likes of the Vauxhall Victor and A55 Cambridge, the then dominant models in this area. As a result, the introduction of the Ford Classic followed. Although a success, the Classic turned out to be a far more upmarket car than planned, so it was back to the drawing board once more. Ford's next project, codenamed the Archbishop, aimed to build an economical yet high-performance car whilst trying to stick to a modest production cost. Designers started by stripping down the Ford Classic and reducing its body weight by 15%. A Kent engine, stroked up to a capacity of 1198cc using a 3-bearing crankshaft, and by 1962 the first Ford Cortina of the 5-generation series had commenced mass production. Front suspension used the McPherson strut system, whilst leaf spring suspension with shockers made up the rear. The Cortina's stylish look was finished off with a distinctive tail light feature that was to become its definitive hallmark. By 1963, customers had the option of a 1500cc engine, which used a 5-bearing crankshaft. Originally available as a 2-door standard or deluxe, the Cortina was soon available as a 4-door. The Super Deluxe Lotus Cortina with twin-cam engine GT and estate versions were all introduced in 1963. It was with special thanks to the success of the Lotus and GT models on the rallying circuit that Ford's already impressive image continued to flourish. Developments of the Mark I were endless. In 1964, an interior ventilation system was fitted that could replace the air in the car every 40 seconds, a point made very clear in Ford's advertising literature. Other changes included the standardization of windscreen washers, 9.5-inch disc brakes, and a heater. Indicators and parking lights were also incorporated into the redesigned front grille, and in total, well over 1 million Mark I Cortinas had been produced by 1966. But this record was soon exceeded with the advent of the Mark II. The new contemporary styled model appeared in autumn 1966. Even though it was sitting on the same floor plan as the Mark I, its increased width made it look bigger. Apart from lighter steering, a tighter turning circle, and a few suspension alterations to compensate for the wider tracking, everything else stayed more or less the same. But of course, hot in pursuit of perfection, Ford soon started on further improvements. A significant change was the revision of the Kent engine, which incorporated a new cylinder head that meant combustion took place in the top of the piston crown instead of the cylinder chamber. The 1200 and the 1500cc engines were stroked up by another litre, and at the top of the range a maximum speed of 87 miles per hour could be achieved. The Mark II Lotus Cortina superseded the Mark II GT on the rally circuit, although the GT was given its chance to shine in the East African Safari Rally of '67, where it took second and third place, earning Ford the manufacturer's team prize. In the meantime, Japanese car imports were becoming highly popular, and British manufacturers were feeling the heat. Ford responded with vigour, and the Mark III Cortina made its debut appearance at the London Motor Show in 1970. With an extra dose of glamour and luxury, no less than 35 variations of the Mark III were on offer. The executive models with velour upholstery, deep pile carpets and wood-finished interior were particularly popular, but today the Mark III has become quite a rarity. In 1976, the Mark III developed into the Cortina Mark IV with an identical floor plan and suspension. The choice remained extensive, but the new car now took on a squarer shape. This model had the shortest lifespan of all the Cortinas, but with the slight makeover by the early 80s, it continued its life as the Mark V. The top of this model range contained the most powerful engine of all the Cortinas, the 2.3 V6 with automatic transmission. The hard edges of the Mark IV were softened, with a curvier nose and new lamps, but other than this, the Mark V had no remarkable differences. The Cortina convertible had also come into play during this time and were available right across the model range. They were, however, quite scarce, and people have since made their own conversions. With the Cortina, Ford had created a car for all occasions, highly practical for family use, with the Lotus and GT derivatives making excellent choices for the rallying circuit. The last Mark V Cortina was produced in 1982, heralding the end of a long and most successful chapter in Ford's history. Promoted as the car you always promised yourself, the Ford Capri sparked a buzz of excitement, serving anybody who wanted an affordable yet sporty car with a practical and family-friendly design. The project, named Colt, initially aimed to design a car for Europe that would produce the same reaction and success as the Ford Mustang had previously had in America. With these precepts in mind, Ford developed an outstanding creation with an astute marketing ploy to match. With the launch of the Ford Capri in January 1969, the British public woke up to find the new arrival strategically parked in hundreds of places across the entire country. The choice seemed endless, and no car dealer could stock every option that was available. There was a range of different sized engines, from the 1300 to the 2000 GT, and soon there was the 3000 GT, which became the fastest production Ford car to be built in Britain at that time. If you wanted to dress the standard base car up, there was a choice of 3 different conversion packs. The X pack gave the customer extra equipment, the L was for luxury, and the R kit provided rally equipment, but it wasn't uncommon to see a combination of these specifications. Success in rallying certainly did no harm for the Capri's appeal, with the four-wheel drive 3000 GT Special wowing television viewers in the Winter Rallycross series of '69. Later, Ford Germany developed an RS 2600 Capri with a V6 engine that went on to dominate the European Touring Car Championships for 2 consecutive years. Cologne in Germany and Halewood in the UK were the only 2 Ford sites to manufacture the Capri. In 1970, the most popular new European Ford car was a Capri, with almost 750,000 being produced by 1972. Various tweaks and alterations were made to the Mark I series of Capris over the years, including a power bulge bonnet, new rear suspension with anti-roll bar, as well as larger and more powerful lamps to the front and rear. Ford also introduced a 1.6-litre Kent engine to replace the overhead cam Pinto unit, whilst other general changes developed a softer ride with easier handling. By 1974, Ford was keen to develop even more dramatic enhancements, leading to the introduction of the Mark II Capri. The obvious difference was the new hatchback form, as opposed to the Mark I 4-seater coupe model. The hatchback allowed for a much greater storage capacity, although it wasn't necessarily to everyone's taste. Differing from its predecessor, the Mark II included larger front disc brakes, better electronics, as well as alternators fitted as standard instead of using dynamos. The 2-litre V4 engine was abandoned for the modern overhead cam Pinto 4, and the X, L and R packs were discontinued, as many found the concept quite annoying. Soon the Ghia arrived on the scene, replacing the Capri GXL. It offered a range of extra features, such as an interior vinyl roof and rear screen wipers, being the epitome of pure luxury at the time. In March 1975, the S model joined the Capri range. A racy little number with gold-coloured alloy wheels, door handles and window mouldings. Customers could choose from a range of engines, with the 3-litre being the largest. Later refinements to the suspension and the addition of gas-filled rear shock absorbers gave an altogether smoother ride. In 1975, all British production came to a close, and manufacturing was sustained solely at the West German factory, from where the final Capri models were built. These included all of the previous Capri model types, which now moved on to the 3rd generation. The range of the Mark III was similarly extensive to the last edition. Cameo, Calypso and Cabaret specials were introduced, but enthusiasts were particularly impressed with the new 2.8 fuel injection Capri. With an impressive 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds, the 2.8 was the fastest production Ford in Europe at that time. But all was not entirely well for Ford Capri during the early 80s, and as sales dropped, the range slowly disintegrated. One of the last models was the Laser, but the final burst of Capri spirit came in the form of the 280 model, also named the Brooklands Capri. This car was based on the 2.8i Special, but with a good dose of luxury. The 280 was padded out in leather upholstery, leather-trimmed steering wheel, plus low-profile tyres and alloy wheels. Ford made sure that the last of the Capris went out in true style. With an impressive 18 years in production and well over 1.5 million built for sale, the Ford Capri is fondly remembered by all, and continues to be enjoyed by enthusiasts everywhere. Since Henry Ford's first revolutionary Model T of 1908, the world of motoring has not once looked back, and in September 1946, Ford was honoured at the American Automotive's Golden Jubilee, where he was recognised for his major contribution to the motoring industry. Over the last 100 years, Henry Ford's influence has not only shaped the world of Ford Motors, but the entire industry of car manufacturing. Enthusiasts have cherished their Ford classics for many years, but with the rapid progression in technology, the car is entering a new era, and soon models such as the Anglia, Popular and Capri will become even more sought after. We can only wait to see what new creations and concept Ford has in store for the next 100 years, and discover which Ford cars of today will become the classics of tomorrow. The story behind the famous name begins in the year 1885, when Siegfried Brittmann started to make and sell bicycles in the English city of Coventry. Brittmann built his first motorcycle in 1902, but it was almost 20 years after this that he branched out into the business of motorcars. Unable to commence manufacturing in his inappropriate multi-storey bike factory, Brittmann decided to buy the assets of the Dawson Car Company, which provided more suitable premises. Brickman soon produced his first ever car, the Triumph Light, with a 1.9-litre engine. However, it wasn't until the 1930s that the company officially acquired the name of Triumph Motor Company. Also making his way into the limelight was a young and ambitious gentleman named Donald Healey, who was becoming quite an achiever on the trial and rally circuit. Success in an international rally or acclaimed tournament was excellent publicity for a car manufacturer and a virtual guarantee of good sales. Triumph, competing in many events during the 1930s and earning a sporty reputation, saw how they could benefit from Healey's talents and approached him to drive the Triumph's Super 7 in Le Mans' 24-hour race. This marked the beginning of a good relationship between Triumph and Healey, and by 1934 he'd become the company's experimental manager. Healey's ideas always gave way to an exceptional car. His first Triumph creation was the Dolomite, a sleek two-seater with stretched bonnet and exposed chrome exhaust. The Dolomite name went on to grace a range of successful Triumph cars. Sheffield-based business T.W. Ward later purchased the Triumph company and placed Healey firmly at the top as general manager. However, with a world war looming overhead, the Triumph Motor Company felt the pressure and sadly went into liquidation in 1939. As we now know, this was far from the end for Triumph Motors. In fact, some of its best years lay ahead. Sir John Black, owner of the Standard Motor Company, bought the bombed-out Triumph factory in 1945, and with big plans in mind, Triumph engineers got straight to work. The next changeover occurred during the early 60s, when the company was taken over by British Leyland Motors. The Triumph creations that followed the Second World War now make up a magnificent collection of family, touring and sports cars, and today we have the pleasure of exploring some of these unique models. The TR2 was the forerunner of a long and successful range of TR models and was responsible for popularising the Triumph name in America. The concept behind its creation was to make a cheap and cheerful sports car that would give rival companies a run for their money. Such aims were successfully achieved, and it's easy to see how when we take a look at this long-door TR2 model made in January 1955. One of the first 1,000 to be made, this early model would have originally retailed at about £790. In 1976, however, this particular car was bought for an unbelievable bargain price of just £90. As the price may well tell you, back in 1976, this model did not resemble the gleaming, healthy specimen that we see today. Back then, as a young and enthusiastic 19-year-old, this Welsh-based Triumph collector had unknowingly taken on a 3-year restoration project. Initially, the car was purchased as a practical solution for getting a young man from A to B. Little did he know that the next few years would be a valuable learning curve that would result in his everlasting passion for the classic Triumph sports car. Just as this collector started off with a lot of hard work on his hands, so did the engineers and designers at Triumph. Sir John Black, managing director of Standard Motor Company, which took over Triumph, was motivated to create a rival sports car when Standard failed to take over the Morgan Company. This initiated the 20TS project in 1952. A tight budget restricted engineers and designers, and the 20TS prototype caused little excitement at the London Motor Show. However, Sir John Black was not perturbed. and a complete redesign was ordered. The new, improved model fashioned a more rigid, ladder-type chassis frame, longer body and bigger boot. A 4-speed gearbox and coil spring suspension were also installed. Thanks to the robust 4-cylinder engine with overhead valve, powerful enough to power a farm tractor, an impressive top speed of 100 miles per hour could be achieved. Demonstrating more speed, style and smoothness than the 20TS model, the TR2 was presented at the 1953 Geneva Motor Show. The first production TR2 rolled off the assembly line at Canley in August of that same year, during which only 250 cars were built. During its years in production, the TR2 attracted the budding sports car market on both sides of the Atlantic. Being successful in a number of rallies and races added to its popularity and stylish image. It executed an outright win at the 1954 RAC Rally of Great Britain, snapping up both first and second place. The TR2 proposed serious competition. Its top speed exceeded that of the MG's TF by 20 miles per hour, and with optional overdrive it could reach 108. The Road and Track magazine in America even recorded 0 to 60 miles per hour within 12.2 seconds. America was particularly impressed with this, not only fast, but also economical Triumph car, and the majority were exported to US dealers. Colours in the TR2 range included black, pearl white, British racing green, birch grey, olive, and of course the most popular of all, signal red. With slight changes in style and an increased engine power, the TR2 evolved into the TR3. This was the first mass-produced sports car to offer front-wheel disc brakes as standard. Further improvements led to the creation of the TR3A and TR3B, and then in 1961, the TR4. One of 8,628 to be produced, this TR2 has lived a long and dynamic life, travelling as far as Holland. It's a fine example of the stylish model that became forerunner to a line of successful TR collectibles, and displays all the glorious features that made the TR2 such a definitive model within the sports car market. In April 1959, the Triumph Herald was released for sale. Unbeknown to Triumph at this time, it would go on to have a very successful production run, spanning 12 years. This fabulous car, a 1360, was the last model type of this particular Triumph range, and displays all the advances in power and design that were eventually made into the Triumph Herald. Interestingly, the model number designation, 1360, reflects the approximate engine cubic capacity and maximum brake horsepower. Even before its evolution into the 1360 model, the Herald was still a cut above the rest, as it was the first mass-produced car in Britain to have all-round independent suspension. Here we can see the coiled spring mechanism that constructs the front suspension. Another characteristic that made the Herald quite advanced for its time was its super tight turning circle, making it easy to get in and out of small spaces. The Herald was also fairly light to handle, a bonus in the days before power steering. Although slightly old-fashioned, the separate frame construction has its advantages, as it's possible to lift the whole front section just by unclipping two hinges on the wings. The very accessible engine makes it easy to carry out maintenance and repair work. Triumph made full use of the separate body and chassis construction. Not only did this type of structure make for cheap and easy assembly in the factory, it was also very convenient for producing a whole range of Herald derivatives. The first Herald model was the coupe, soon joined by the more spacious saloon, and in March 1960 the convertible followed. Engines of the coupe and convertible were fitted with twin carburetors as standard, as this 1360 also displays, and later this became an option for the saloon. The four-cylinder engine of this model with 1296cc is far larger and more powerful than that of the earlier engines. These only had a cubic capacity of 948 and were discontinued in 1964. Triumph didn't make a straightforward leap from the first Herald car to the more developed version like this 1360. The popular 1200 series and the less successful Herald S were both launched in 1961, followed by the 1250 Saloon in 1963. Sturdier frames, larger engines and stylistic revisions meant that bigger and better packages were offered each time. The ongoing improvements were spurred along by the competition that was ever looming, each car manufacturer striving to dominate the market. The Triumph Herald also paved the way for some of the other all-time classics, such as the GT6 and Spitfire sports cars. With its unique character and practicalities, the Triumph Herald is highly regarded among today's classic car enthusiasts. Availability of spares is generally good, but obtaining original parts can be more difficult, with some panel work and early trim appearing to be the most problematic. Club support for the Herald is excellent. The Triumph Sport 6 Club, based in Leicester, is a good one for any Triumph lover, but one of its primary aims is to promote the preservation of the Herald chassis. For what was once worth £400, this Triumph Herald is now valued between £2,000 and £3,000. Since it was made in 1969, it has been well cared for and well used, doing over 74,000 miles. This Herald owner would recommend any collector to visit one of the countrywide shows that cater for the Herald enthusiast. But above all, he advises anyone taking on a similar project to make sure it's okay with their wife first. People may automatically think of the famous World War II fighter aircraft at the mention of the Spitfire, but the Triumph fanatics amongst you will probably be thinking more along the lines of the all-time classic Triumph car. The exact details of how Triumph adopted the famous name have been lost in the realms of history, although it's thought that it could have been something to do with the company's role in producing Spitfire aircraft parts during the war. Unbelievably, when the owner of this now very fine-looking Spitfire made his investment, he paid just £500. Today, though, after a gruelling restoration project, it's now worth 9 times as much, being valued at £4,500. Built in 1974, this Mark V model makes up the collection of last-generation Spitfires that Triumph produced. The 5th-generation models were looked upon as the most definitive Spitfire variant and were a mean contender for its ultimate rival, the MG Midget. The first model of this series was the Spitfire 4, although this isn't to be confused with the later Mark IV model. The number 4 in the original Spitfire's title simply refers to the amount of cylinders in the engine. Due to disruptions, such as the company's near bankruptcy and the takeover by Leyland Motors, it was a close call as to whether the Spitfire would be produced at all. Designer Giovanni Michelotti was forced to abandon the original project named the Bomb, and it was only after a Leyland executive had inquired about what was beneath an old dust sheet in a corner of the workshop that the venture was able to continue. The first Spitfire was launched in 1962 at the London Motor Show and was an immediate success. It was also the perfect contender for Triumph's main competition at the time, the Austin Healey Sprite, and although the Spitfire was a little more expensive, the public was completely won over. The model was based on an old shortened Herald chassis frame and allowed for a much lower, sporty feel. Unlike the Herald, the Spitfire's body panels were welded firmly together and attached to the frame, although the useful hinged bonnet, a popular feature of the Herald, remained in the design. It was a surefire hit in America, selling over 6,000 models during 1963. Just 2 years later, and over 9,000 had been sold in 1 year. For a compact, value-for-money 1960 sports car, the top speed of 92 miles per hour was something to be proud of. The 1965 Mark II Spitfire model was introduced as a response to the improved Austin Healey Sprite and MG Midget, and once again it was an outright success. With a more powerful Herald-derived 1147cc engine, additional door trims, and optional wire wheels and heating, more than 37,000 Mark II models rolled off the assembly line. A revised front grille and new badges were the most significant distinguishing features of this model. The greatly improved Mark III Spitfire began production in 1967. It had a larger 15-inch steering wheel, wood veneer dashboard, and, to comply with new American safety legislation, this model also featured a raised front bumper. The most significant change, though, was probably the upgraded 1296cc engine. Staggeringly, over 65,000 Mark IIIs were produced, including the 100,000th Spitfire model ever to be made. The Mark III also came with a new and improved folding top, which was previously more of a build-it-yourself roof to be stowed away in the boot. The new roof was more or less permanently attached to the car. For the introduction of the 4th generation model, Michelotti basically performed an all-over body rework, producing a much more modern design. Stylists made further improvements to the roof, adding plastic mouldings for increased head protection. They also came up with a new hardtop version that offered a much flatter effect. By the end of its production run in 1974, the Mark IV Spitfire had become slightly underpowered. Although the 1493cc engine had been introduced onto the US market during the Mark IV series, emission regulations meant that the engine power was not given the room to reach its full potential. With a review of the situation, Triumph introduced the 5th generation series, the Spitfire 1500, which gave other markets around the world the option of the larger motor. Now mated to a Marina gearbox, the new engine could produce 71 brake horsepower, and for the first time in the Spitfire's history, the car could reach a top speed of 100 miles per hour. Thanks to an improved torque, the car also gives a far more flexible drive. After 18 long years of production, British Leyland felt that the Spitfire could no longer contend with the increasingly competitive market. The last Spitfire, an Inca Yellow 1500, rolled off Canley's assembly line in August 1980 and is now on display at the British Motor Heritage Museum in Gaydon. Given the name, one may think that the TR7 is a direct descendant of the model range that was inspired by the TR2. As we can see from this drop-head coupe soft top, similarities are few and far between. North America's avid sports car market was seen as the primary destination for the new model. With this in mind, British Leyland, parent company of Triumph at the time, took into account that new US legislation proposed to ban the use of convertible cars. Not only this, but the proposed legislation would also require minimum bumper and headlight heights, as well as bumpers that could withstand a 5-mile-per-hour crash. Harris Mann, stylist at the old Austin Morris Studios, was appointed principal TR7 designer and had to come up with something that would comply with the proposed legislation. Thus, in the January of 1975, the revolutionary wedge-like shape sports car was born. During this year, the TR7 was available for American export only, and in May the following year it went on sale to the rest of the world. Other than the feeling of pride and pleasure of restoring and driving a classic car such as this, there are further perks to enjoy. One is the exemption of road tax, which applies to UK owners of classics made before 1973. Although this collector does not benefit from this particular bonus, he does enjoy a cheaper classic car insurance. If one opts for a limited mileage policy, then the insurance is lower still. With its colourful history and revolutionary looks, the TR7 has accumulated a faithful following among today's Triumph fans, continually growing in popularity. This collector would certainly agree, and recommends any enthusiast to join one of the nationwide TR clubs. And so, this sadly marks the end of our Triumph Classics tour. The company continued to deliver style and quality to the ever-demanding international car market for some time, until finally, in 1981, the company embarked on a joint venture with Japanese company Honda and produced the Acclaim. The Acclaim was sold in 3 different models: the HL, HLS and Automatic, and with its 4-cylinder engine had a brake horsepower of 70. Lasting a total production run of 3 years, the Acclaim was the last ever model to wear the Triumph badge. To recap on some of Triumph's most distinguishing features, such as the unbeatable Spitfire, the notorious V8 engine, not to mention Michelotti's stylish curves and angles, define just a few of the factors that have made the Triumph name so famous and well celebrated. With today's thriving market of classic car collectors, Triumph has truly come into its glory and is a popular choice among thousands. There's still a whole range of fabulous Triumph cars out there waiting to be explored, including the Mayflower, Southern Cross, Roadster and the TR8 Special that was made for the 1981 Le Mans 24-hour race. There's also the oldest surviving Triumph, the 1923 1020, of which there's only one known example left. But only having had time to explore a handful of Triumph's finest cars may have left some of you wanting a little bit extra. So, for anyone wanting to get even more upfront and personal, why not make it over to the Gaydon Motor Heritage Centre or a specialised Triumph event? With a quick surf through cyberspace, you're more than likely to find one taking place close to your area. You could think of joining a club, or if you haven't done so already, why not invest in one of these beauties for yourself? Remember, buying a classic Triumph, or any classic car for that matter, doesn't have to break the bank, as there's always a bargain to be found. There are also some huge benefits from owning a classic car. For one, you can make use of the excellently valued insurance policies on offer for all classic models, not to mention the free road tax for British-based owners of cars over a certain age. Collecting, or simply being an enthusiast, can also be a very sociable pastime, and reusing a car that might have otherwise been sent to the scrap heap is an excellent bonus for the environment too. From Triumph's early heydays to its popularity in the most stylish of classic car collections, there is no doubt that the Triumph name is here to stay.